I pronounce the name correct. If I don't, apologies. Yahya Al-taie from Iraq to give your speech, then followed by Ava Masumi Bandari from Iran. So I introduce you, Yahya, and Ava, starting with Yahya to give your opening speech. Over to you, Yahya.
Okay. Thank you very much, Moses. And actually, Ava and I have planned something like we will be doing together as a presentation. So we will be speaking together. So I'll start by saying like, hello, everybody. I'm Yahya Sami from Baghdad, Iraq. Today, my colleague Ava from Shiraz, Iran, and I will be telling you about Iraq and Iran and the 8 years war our countries had in the past, and the repercussions of this war, the things that both nations share in common between Iraq and Iran, and the suggested alternatives to actively engage in the reconciliation and peace-building process between the two countries. I'll start by telling you about my father, Sami, who's a civilian man born in 1953. He holds a degree in economy and management. He graduated in 1977 and served his regular military duty for a year and a half. Then was recalled to serve for the entire 8 years war, starting 1980. And this lasted for 8 years, since he was 25 until he was almost 34 years old. The war took the flower of his youth and the best years of his life. And this was a lesson learned in the hard way. So when he was called again to serve for the Kuwait War in 1990, he didn't join the army in spite of the serious risk of punishment by the Iraqi regime back then. I will now move to my colleague Ava, and the stage is yours, Ava.
Thank you so much, Yahya. And I would like to say that it is an honor to be here. And let me start by telling you the story of my uncle, Muhammad, who fought in the war in the bloom of his youth, where he not only lost his leg, but his enthusiasm for life. He would rarely leave his house, and he passed away a few years ago due to liver failure. Well, he was among one of the many victims of the war. Um, Perhaps the most devastating aspect of the war was the use of chemical weapons that killed many on the spot, contaminating thousands of civilians, including women and children. Today, many of the remaining survivors are still suffering due to complications of the nerve agents used against them. But what was the root cause of the war between Iran and Iraq? Well, the conflict started when the changes in governments regimes in both Iran and Iraq took place, where Saddam Hussein, the president of the Republic of Iraq, and Khomeini, the supreme revolutionary leader of the Islamic Republic of Iran, came into power. Well, Yahya will give you a more detailed account on what took place.
Thank you very much, Ava. Like to address your point, I would say that no one really knows who started the war, as generations in both countries were educated on accusing the other side on starting the longest conventional armed conflict of the 20th century that lasted for 8 years, as we mentioned before, starting September 1980 and ending until August 1988. The cost of this war was millions of lives, as well as destroying both armies and economic systems of both countries. But what is known for sure is that like the difference in ideologies and of the governing regimes that were in power in these two countries was the main cause of the war. These were expanding the Islamic revolution from the Iranian side and defending the Arab nation as a justification from the Iraqi side. To give you a better insight about how devastating this war was, the total casualties of this war was 2 million people, including 1 million people of confirmed deaths. And the total cost of the war for both countries is estimated to reach 400 billion US dollars back then, which can easily like equal its doubles nowadays. But what's more important than the war, because it happened and it's in the past, what's more important is to focus on the things we share in common. For example, we share borders. Iraq and Iran share one of the longest landline borders That's over 1,600 kilometers. For people like without metric systems, use empirical systems, it's almost like 955 miles along the entire east side of Iraq and the west side of Iran. These include different terrains such as mountains, plains, plateaus, valleys, in addition to the Arabian Persian Gulf in the south of both countries. For more things that we share in common, I will give the stage to my colleague Ava. Ava.
Yeah. Aside from sharing a same border, there are many other things that we have in common. For example, we have similar cultural norms, traditions, as well as religion, history, and even cuisine. And also, we have similar taste in music, we have similar religious rituals. But if we have so much in common, surely we can use them to tackle the decades of conflicts amongst the two nations. Well, Yahya will give you a better insight as to how we can work things out. Back to you, Yahya.
Thank you very much, Ava. What we should focus on the most, and what's mostly important, is that why should we work together? It's because the vast majority of both Iraqis and Iranians currently have lack of trust in their current governments and governing regimes, and that both nations aspire for a better future for their countries. And recently, maybe the governments in both countries seem to be on the same page sometimes, but the common good of their nations do not look like a priority because the suffering of both nations continues. For a better future of upcoming generations, and for both nations should focus on what really matters the most. It's building peace and forgetting about the times where regimes led people of both countries into an aimless and useless wars and conflicts that took both countries backwards by centuries. And one of our most important missions or tasks during this program is, as young leaders, is to focus on ways to reconcile and build peace. And among these, some of the most important ones are to re-establishing social relations between the two nations, as well as empowering young leaders from both countries. I'm saying young leaders, and I mean by young leaders that leaders that come with new ideas and new methods to build peace and to prioritize the common good for all. If one last idea we would like to focus on here as an insight, if the money spent on the 8 years war we're speaking about in both countries was invested in development, in education, in healthcare, public services, and infrastructures, Iraq and Iran could now be seen among the leading countries in the region, if not the entire globe. By the end, before we wrap up, my colleague Ava has something that's really touching. She would like to share with us. The mic is yours, Ava.
I'd like to say that we all know that wars bring absolutely no good for humankind. They bring absolutely nothing to the table. So this is a lesson that we need to learn right here and right now, and not in a hard way, because this is our choice, our destiny, and our future. So as we know,
if we want a better future,
we should make it happen.
I totally agree.